Welcome, everyone. Today, we dive into the incredible world of mountain men and their extraordinary survival skills. From deadly blizzards to freezing temperatures, these rugged pioneers faced some of the harshest conditions on Earth. And yet, they not only survived, they thrived. Join us as we explore how they built ingenious shelters, mastered fire and bedding, and turned the wilderness into a livable space. Prepare to uncover lessons of resilience, ingenuity, and human endurance that are as inspiring today as they were centuries ago. Imagine standing alone in the middle of a vast mountain wilderness. Snow stretches as far as the eye can see, turning hills and valleys into endless waves of white. The wind bites at your exposed skin, so sharp it feels like tiny shards of glass. The cold is not just uncomfortable, it seeps into your bones, making each breath a visible puff of white in the freezing air. Above, clouds swirl dark and low, hinting at the coming storm. In the distance, jagged peaks pierce the sky, their slopes covered with ice that glints like diamonds in the fleeting sunlight. This is not a scene from a winter postcard. It is the everyday reality for the mountain men of early America. They lived in a world where nature was not merely a backdrop, but a force capable of ending a life in minutes. Yet, in the face of these challenges, they survived. How? Through resilience, knowledge, and an extraordinary ability to adapt to one of the harshest environments on the continent. Life for mountain men was never easy. They were trappers, hunters, explorers, and adventurers who ventured far beyond the safety of settlements. Unlike pioneers who traveled in wagons with families and supplies, mountain men were often alone or in small groups, carrying only what they could manage on their backs or on a horse. Food was hunted or trapped, clothing was made from animal hides, and every day was a constant negotiation with the environment. The mountains were beautiful, yes, but they were also merciless. Blizzards could appear without warning, and temperatures could drop to levels that would test even the hardiest traveler. A single misstep, a wrong choice of shelter, a poorly built fire, or getting caught in a sudden storm could prove fatal. To understand how mountain men survived, we must first understand their mindset. These men were not reckless thrill seekers. They were highly observant, strategic, and intimately familiar with the land. They had to be. Survival was not about luck. It was about preparation, adaptability, and learning to read the signs that nature provided. A slight change in wind direction, the smell of fresh snowfall, the behavior of wildlife, all could indicate that a storm was coming. The mountain men became attuned to these details, honing instincts that modern humans, accustomed to technology and shelter, rarely develop. Shelters were central to survival. A well-built shelter was not a luxury, it was the difference between life and death. Mountain men could not rely on tents or permanent cabins. Timber was not always available, and storms could destroy flimsy structures in minutes. They had to use whatever materials were at hand: fallen branches, tree bark, rocks, and snow. Every element of a shelter was deliberate, designed to block wind, retain heat, and keep snow from collapsing the structure. For instance, the placement of the shelter was strategic. A lean against a rock face might protect from the strongest wind, while a hollow or depression in the snow could reduce exposure to freezing gusts. Understanding the terrain was as important as understanding the materials themselves. The psychological aspect of survival cannot be underestimated. Facing a blizzard in the mountains is not just a physical challenge, it is a mental one. The cold is relentless, fatigue sets in quickly, and isolation can lead to despair. Mountain men developed a mental resilience born from necessity. They had to remain calm under pressure, make rational decisions in life, threatening situations, and maintain hope even when everything seemed against them. This mental fortitude, coupled with practical skills, allowed them to endure conditions that would overwhelm ordinary people. Consider The sheer unpredictability of mountain weather. A clear morning could quickly turn into a snowstorm by afternoon. Blizzards in the Rockies, for example, could bring several feet of snow in hours, reducing visibility to near zero and making navigation almost impossible. Temperatures could drop below freezing even in early autumn, and wind chill could turn a moderate cold into a deadly threat. Mountain men learned to anticipate these changes. They observed animal behavior, birds seeking shelter, deer moving to lower elevations as natural warning systems. They also developed an understanding of snow and ice, learning how to read the terrain to avoid avalanches or treacherous drifts. Food and warmth were inextricably linked to shelter. A man without shelter could not preserve energy or body heat. Exposure rapidly drained strength, reducing the ability to hunt or forage. Mountain men understood this intimately. They carried tools not just for hunting, but for creating shelter, digging snow caves, or building a quick windbreak. Fire was essential, but it had to be managed carefully. Too large, a fire could melt the walls of a snow shelter. Too small, and it would fail to provide warmth. The placement of firewood, stones, and even snow around the fire was carefully considered. Every decision was tactical, aimed at maximizing survival chances. The ingenuity of mountain men extended beyond simple shelters. They developed techniques to make temporary homes highly efficient. Lean-tos, for example, were simple frameworks of branches leaned against a sturdy tree or rock wall. On the surface, it might look like a basic structure, but every branch, every layer of bark or brush, served a purpose, blocking wind, trapping heat, and keeping snow from collapsing on the occupant. For harsher conditions, mountain men built snow caves using the insulating properties of snow itself. These caves were not luxurious. They were tight, dark, and cold, but they could be life-saving. The interior temperature of a well-constructed snow cave could be several degrees above the brutal air outside, just enough to prevent hypothermia, but survival was never guaranteed. Even the most experienced mountain men faced death from storms, avalanches, or accidents. Supplies could run out, injuries could occur, and navigation errors could leave a man lost in a white wasteland. Yet, many survived not by luck, but by using knowledge passed down through experience and observation. Skills were shared among groups, stories of survival taught younger men, and mistakes were learned from quickly. This culture of knowledge sharing created a lineage of survival wisdom that was vital for anyone venturing into the mountains. Mountain men also understood the importance of timing and planning. Winters were harsh and prolonged, and journeys had to be carefully scheduled. Knowing when to seek shelter, when to move, and when to hunt or trap could mean the difference between life and death. A miscalculation could leave a man exposed during the deadliest months. They learned to carry minimal yet essential supplies, balancing the need for mobility with the need for survival. Animal furs, dried meat, and basic tools were all carefully chosen for weight, utility, and survival value. Community, too, played a subtle role. While many mountain men worked alone, they often traveled in small, loose networks. These groups shared intelligence about trails, hunting grounds, and weather patterns. They passed down techniques for building more effective shelters, methods for maintaining warmth, and strategies for rationing food. Even in isolation, the knowledge of others formed a lifeline, creating a hidden safety net across the wilderness. Survival was not just about facing storms. It was about respecting the environment. Mountain men learned that the land was not an enemy but a partner. Snow could be used as insulation. Trees provided building materials. Rivers offered water and guidance. By observing, adapting, and innovating, they turned a hostile environment into one where survival was possible, even in the most extreme conditions. This respect for nature was not sentimental. It was pragmatic. Every decision, every observation had consequences that could be life-saving or deadly. In essence, the story of mountain men surviving deadly blizzards is a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability. It is about the careful observation of nature, the strategic use of limited resources, and the mental fortitude to face isolation, extreme cold, and danger with courage. These men exemplify the art of survival, teaching lessons that remain relevant today for adventurers, historians, and anyone fascinated by the limits of human endurance. When we look back at their lives, we see more than simple shelters and rugged men. We see a mastery of environment, a profound understanding of survival, and a relentless drive to endure against the odds. Their story reminds us that, even in the most inhospitable conditions, human determination, skill, and ingenuity can triumph. And as we imagine standing in the middle of those snow-covered mountains, facing the roaring wind and the biting cold, we begin to understand what it truly means to survive and to live like a mountain man. The wilderness of North America is vast, unforgiving, and breathtakingly beautiful. For those who first ventured into its remote mountain ranges, the environment was both a source of life and a constant, invisible threat. Unlike settlers who established permanent towns and farms, mountain men lived in the wild, relying entirely on their knowledge of the land and their ability to adapt to its demands. They did not have roads, maps, or clear trails. Rivers, ridges, and forests were their highways, and every step required attention, caution, and skill. Understanding the land was not an academic exercise. It was a matter of survival. From an early age, mountain men learned to observe the world around them with extraordinary detail. They studied the growth patterns of trees, the behavior of animals, the flow of streams, and the formation of snowdrifts. Every detail of the environment could provide crucial information. A bird's sudden flight might signal a predator nearby, or the rustle of leaves could warn of approaching weather. By reading these signs, mountain men could anticipate danger, locate resources, and plan their shelter and travel accordingly. One of the first challenges they faced was terrain. Mountainous regions are not uniform. There are peaks, valleys, ridges, cliffs, and plateaus, each with unique weather patterns and risks. A seemingly gentle slope might hide loose rocks that could trigger an avalanche. A river valley could flood without warning after heavy snowfall or rainfall. Mountain men learned to recognize these patterns through repeated exposure and observation. They understood that survival depended on careful movement through these terrains, avoiding areas where snow or rock might turn deadly. The mountains also offered natural materials essential for survival. Trees, for example, were more than sources of firewood. They were building blocks for shelter. Different types of wood had different properties. Pine boughs, for instance, were flexible and could be woven into roofs or walls to create a protective barrier against wind and snow. Hardwoods like oak or maple provided structural support, capable of holding up lean-tos or brush huts against heavy snowfall. Mountain men knew how to select, cut, and shape these materials with minimal effort, using simple hand tools and techniques passed down from earlier explorers. Rocks were equally important. Large stones could act as windbreaks, foundations for fire pits, or structural anchors for shelters. When constructing a lean-to or a more complex brush hut, strategic placement of rocks ensured stability and safety. Even small stones were valuable. They could be used to elevate firewood, create drainage channels, or insulate floors from freezing ground. The ability to use every element of the landscape effectively was a hallmark of mountain men's ingenuity. Snow, which seems like a hindrance to modern adventurers, was another crucial resource. Mountain men discovered early that snow could be both a challenge and a tool. While blizzards and deep snowdrifts could slow travel and bury supplies, snow was also an excellent insulator. Snow caves, dug into deep drifts, could maintain temperatures above freezing even during the harshest storms. Understanding how snow behaves, how it compacts, where it accumulates, and how it can be shaped, was a skill that literally meant the difference between life and death. Mountain men learned to recognize safe snowbanks for shelter, avoid avalanche-prone areas, and use snow to protect fire pits and pathways. Water, essential for life, was both abundant and challenging to manage. Streams and rivers provided drinking water, but in freezing temperatures, these sources could be treacherous. Ice-covered rivers were sometimes deceptive. Thin ice could break underfoot, leading to potentially fatal immersion in freezing water. Mountain men had to know when and where to cross safely, how to melt snow for drinking water without wasting fuel, and how to identify natural springs that would not freeze in winter. Even a small error in assessing water sources could have catastrophic consequences. Animals were both friends and indicators of environmental conditions. Mountain men hunted for food, but observing wildlife also provided subtle warnings about weather and terrain. Deer moving to lower elevations might signal an approaching storm, while birds seeking shelter could indicate sudden temperature drops. Predators, too, served as cautionary signs. Tracks in snow might show that wolves or bears were nearby, and mountain men learned to avoid areas where hunting or scavenging animals posed threats. The ability to read these patterns required patience, experience, and constant attention to detail. In addition to natural materials, mountain men carried minimal tools to help them adapt to the environment. Axes, knives, and saws allowed them to shape wood, cut through brush, and create structural supports. Flint or steel provided fire, starting capabilities, and basic rope or cordage could bind materials together. These tools were essential, but knowing how to use them efficiently and sparingly was just as important as possessing them. Supplies were limited, and carrying unnecessary items could hinder mobility, especially in steep or snow-covered terrain. Mountain men also understood the importance of location for building shelters. Placement could determine whether a shelter would survive a storm or be buried by snow. South-facing slopes were often preferred to capture sunlight, reduce wind exposure, and melt accumulated snow. Valleys could provide natural windbreaks, while areas near trees or rock formations offered both structural support and protection from gusts. Even minor details, such as building a shelter slightly above the surrounding snow level to avoid water runoff, could dramatically improve the chances of survival. The knowledge of materials and land was not theoretical. It was applied practically and creatively. Mountain men often adapted existing natural formations, turning a fallen tree into the main support for a lean-to, or using a boulder as a wall for a brush hut. They experimented constantly, learning what worked best under varying conditions. Some techniques were simple, such as layering pine boughs for insulation, while others were complex, like shaping snow caves with ventilation channels that prevented suffocation while retaining heat. This deep understanding of land and materials also influenced how mountain men traveled. They knew that carrying too much was dangerous, as it slowed movement and increased exposure to elements. Therefore, they relied on locally available resources, planning routes that would allow access to water, shelter materials, and food. Every journey required a delicate balance of preparation, observation, and improvisation. They had to anticipate obstacles, identify natural resources, and make real-time decisions in response to changing weather and terrain. Experience, above all, was the teacher. Young men learned from elders who had spent years navigating the mountains. They were taught to observe subtle environmental cues, the direction of snowdrifts, the condition of tree branches, or the presence of animal tracks. Mistakes were dangerous, but each error offered critical lessons. Over time, mountain men developed an almost instinctive understanding of the wilderness, combining practical skills with a mental map of terrain, climate, and resource availability. Mountain men's relationship with the land was symbiotic. The wilderness was a provider and a teacher, offering everything necessary for survival if one knew how to observe and adapt. They respected the environment not out of sentiment, but because it demanded respect. Misjudging snow patterns, underestimating wind, or selecting the wrong location for a shelter could result in injury or death. Their survival depended on a keen understanding of the environment and the ability to make the most of whatever nature offered. In practical terms, this knowledge manifested in the construction of shelters, the management of fire, the gathering of food, and the planning of travel. Every action was informed by a deep familiarity with natural patterns and material properties. Mountain men did not rely on luck. They relied on skill, observation, and experience honed over years. This expertise was often shared in small communities or through storytelling, ensuring that critical survival knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Understanding the land also had long-term implications. Mountain men were pioneers of wilderness navigation and survival techniques that later explorers, settlers, and even modern survivalists would study and adapt. Their methods of reading the environment, selecting resources, and creating effective shelters laid the foundation for wilderness survival knowledge that persists to this day. Ultimately, the story of mountain men and their mastery of land and materials is a story of human adaptation. It is a testament to how observation, ingenuity, and practical knowledge can allow humans to survive in extreme conditions. By learning to use the environment wisely, mountain men were able to thrive in places that would seem inhospitable, even deadly, to others. Their legacy reminds us that survival is not just about physical strength. It is about understanding, adapting, and respecting the world around us. As we look back, we realize that their skills were not just practical. They were a philosophy of life. The wilderness demanded attention, creativity, and respect, and those who could meet its challenges found both survival and mastery. Mountain men teach us that understanding the land is not a passive activity. It is an active engagement, a constant dialogue with the natural world. And in this dialogue, the clever use of materials, the careful observation of terrain, and the intuitive reading of weather could make the difference between life and death. In the vast, rugged wilderness of the mountains, survival often hinged on one critical factor: shelter. Without it, the mountain men of the 18th and 19th centuries faced certain peril. The elements were unforgiving. Snow could accumulate in feet, wind gusts could reach deadly speeds, and temperatures often dropped far below freezing. Shelter was more than a place to rest. It was a lifeline, a fortress against the relentless cold, and a tool that could mean the difference between life and death. Understanding the ingenuity behind mountain men's shelters offers a window into their remarkable ability to adapt, improvise, and thrive in a world that most of us would never dare to enter. The most iconic and commonly used shelter was the lean-to. At first glance, a lean-to might appear simple, almost crude. A few branches leaned against a tree or rock, covered with leaves or bark, but its simplicity was precisely what made it effective. Mountain men learned to exploit natural features of the land to enhance the shelter's protective abilities. A lean-to placed against a rock wall for example, would benefit from the stone's inherent stability and insulation properties. Rocks absorbed heat from the sun during the day and released it slowly, providing subtle warmth. Leaning the structure against a large tree could block wind and create a barrier against drifting snow. Every element of placement and construction was intentional, honed over countless winters through trial, error, and observation. Construction of a lean-to required more than simply stacking branches. Mountain men carefully selected their materials, knowing that the wrong choice could spell disaster. They favored branches that were flexible enough to bend without breaking, but strong enough to support additional weight. Pine boughs were particularly valuable. Their needles created dense coverage that blocked wind and trapped heat. Smaller branches and brush were layered strategically to close gaps, preventing snow from blowing inside. Animal hides might be draped over the structure when available, adding a critical layer of insulation. In this way, the lean-to became a highly functional shelter despite its apparent simplicity. The design of a lean-to also considered human ergonomics and safety. The angle of the slanted roof, for example, was deliberately chosen to shed snow efficiently. A steep angle prevented accumulation, reducing the risk of collapse. The opening of the lean-to was typically oriented away from prevailing winds, and the floor was often elevated slightly or covered with pine boughs, moss, or leaves to insulate against the cold ground. Mountain men understood that warmth was not just a function of the walls and roof, but also of the surface on which they slept. The careful layering of natural materials created a microenvironment that, while far from luxurious, was remarkably effective at conserving body heat. For mountain men who traveled along rivers or valleys, brush huts were another common form of shelter. These were slightly more complex than Lean-tos and required more construction effort. A brush hut typically involved creating a framework of small trees or sturdy branches, forming walls and a roof. Pine boughs, moss, leaves, and sometimes snow were used to fill in gaps and insulate the interior. These huts were often low to the ground and had sloped roofs to prevent snow from piling up. Despite their modest appearance, brush huts were carefully engineered. The mountain men understood that stability, wind resistance, and heat retention were critical, and they adjusted construction methods based on location, available materials, and anticipated weather conditions. The interiors of brush huts were optimized for survival as well. A small fire could be built on stones or packed earth to provide warmth, while bedding made of pine boughs or firs lifted the occupant off the cold ground. Smoke holes were carefully positioned to allow ventilation without letting in drafts. The design reflected an intimate understanding of thermodynamics, even if the mountain men would never have used that term. They knew through experience how heat behaves in a confined space, how wind can infiltrate gaps, and how insulation can make a modest structure habitable even during a blizzard. While Lean-tos and brush huts were effective in many situations, the most extreme winters required more ingenious solutions. When snow piled high and winds howled across the ridges, mountain men turned to snow caves. These shelters used the very element that threatened their survival, snow as a protective barrier. At first glance, a snow cave seems counterintuitive. How could being buried in snow, surrounded by sub-zero temperatures, provide warmth? The answer lies in the insulating properties of snow. Packed snow traps air, creating a barrier that slows the transfer of heat. A properly constructed snow cave can maintain an interior temperature several degrees above freezing, even when the blizzard outside rages at temperatures far below zero. Building a snow cave required skill, patience, and careful planning. Mountain men would first identify a suitable snowdrift, ideally one that was dense and stable. They would then dig horizontally into the drift, creating a small chamber just large enough to accommodate the body and any necessary supplies. The interior was carved with smooth walls to prevent collapse and shaped to allow for comfortable sitting or lying positions. The entrance was often tunneled slightly downward, forming a cold trap that prevented icy winds from penetrating the main chamber. This simple but effective design maximized warmth and minimized exposure to the elements. Ventilation was a critical consideration in snow caves. Too little airflow could lead to suffocation or the buildup of carbon dioxide from fires or body heat, while too much could allow freezing air to enter. Mountain men would poke small holes in the roof or walls to provide just enough circulation, balancing the need for fresh air with the need to retain heat. Inside, bedding made from pine boughs, leaves, or animal hides insulated against the cold floor, while a small fire or smoldering embers could provide additional warmth. Despite being surrounded by snow, a snow cave could be a surprisingly comfortable and safe refuge during a storm. Mountain men also learned to combine techniques for maximum efficiency. A lean-to might be built adjacent to a snow cave, providing a workspace or fire area while keeping the sleeping chamber protected. Brush huts could be augmented with snow walls or bough insulation to improve their resilience. Every design choice reflected a balance between available materials, environmental conditions, and human needs. Survival was an ongoing process of observation, adaptation, and refinement. The ingenuity of these shelters went beyond structural design. Mountain men understood psychological factors as well. The interior of a shelter, whether a lean-to, brush hut, or snow cave, provided more than physical protection. It offered a sense of security and control. In the middle of a raging storm, knowing that a stable, insulated shelter awaited at the end of the day could boost morale, preserve mental clarity, and sustain energy. Mountain men recognized that survival was not purely physical. The mind needed reassurance and a safe space to recover from exposure, fatigue, and stress. Fire management was equally crucial inside these shelters. In a snow cave, for instance, a small fire needed to be carefully maintained to prevent melting the walls or creating excessive smoke. Mountain men learned to build stone fire bases, regulate fuel, and position embers strategically. Even in Lean-tos and brush huts, fire placement was deliberate, aimed at maximizing warmth while minimizing risk. The combination of insulation, bedding, and fire created an environment where survival was possible even during prolonged blizzards. The materials themselves held lessons. Pine boughs, moss, snow, rocks, and animal hides were not just building blocks. They were versatile tools that could be used in multiple ways. A branch could serve as a structural beam, a fire stick, or a spear for hunting. Animal hides could insulate bedding, cover a shelter, or be worn to conserve body heat. Mountain men's ability to see potential in every natural resource reflects a mindset of adaptability and resourcefulness that was essential for survival in such a hostile environment. Historical accounts provide vivid examples of these shelters in action. Trappers and explorers often described huddling in snow caves for days during unexpected blizzards, relying on their knowledge of construction, insulation, and fire management to survive. Lean-tos were frequently described as critical lifesavers during sudden storms, allowing men to ride out conditions that would have been fatal in the open. Brush huts, with their careful layering of boughs and snow, were noted for their durability and comfort relative to simpler structures. Each shelter type reflects a combination of practical experience, ingenuity, and the willingness to adapt to ever-changing conditions. Even in the most extreme conditions, mountain men often carried minimal tools for building and maintaining shelters. A small axe, knife, or saw could be used to shape branches, cut boughs, or carve snow channels. Rope or cordage allowed for binding structures securely, These tools were lightweight, portable, and multi-functional, reflecting an understanding of efficiency and necessity. Combined with careful observation of the land and weather, they allowed mountain men to create highly effective shelters in a matter of hours. The legacy of these shelters extends beyond survival stories. Modern survivalists, outdoorsmen, and educators study Lean-tos, brush huts, and snow caves as examples of applied ingenuity. These designs demonstrate principles of insulation, wind resistance, structural stability, and fire management that remain relevant in extreme wilderness survival today. The knowledge gained by mountain men laid the groundwork for modern outdoor skills, showing how careful observation, resourcefulness, and adaptability can turn the harshest environments into manageable, even habitable spaces. Ultimately, the story of Lean-tos, brush huts, and snow caves is not just about shelter. It is about the remarkable ability of humans to adapt, innovate, and survive. Mountain men were pioneers of practical engineering, environmental observation, and mental resilience. Their shelters were more than constructions. They were lifelines, testaments to human creativity, and strategies honed under extreme conditions. Through these shelters, we gain insight into how necessity drives innovation, how knowledge of the environment becomes a survival tool, and how even the harshest elements can be transformed into allies with skill and experience. In reflecting on these shelters, one sees a holistic system of survival, the careful selection of materials, the strategic placement of structures, the thoughtful design of interiors, the management of fire, and the psychological comfort they provided. Each shelter was a carefully orchestrated blend of practicality, ingenuity, and environmental awareness. Mountain men did not merely endure the wilderness, they mastered it in a way that allowed them to survive, explore, and thrive where others could not. In the unforgiving wilderness of the mountains, the extreme winter months presented challenges that tested the limits of human endurance. Snow could accumulate rapidly, winds could reach lethal speeds, and temperatures could plunge far below freezing. For mountain men, survival was not a matter of chance. It was the result of careful planning, intimate knowledge of the environment, and innovative shelter techniques. Among these, snow caves and log cabins stand out as critical adaptations that allowed these rugged men to endure conditions that would seem insurmountable to most. The snow cave, in particular, was a marvel of practical ingenuity. At first glance, the idea of digging into snow to survive might seem counterintuitive. Snow, after all, is cold, heavy, and potentially suffocating. Yet, snow has remarkable insulating properties. Packed snow traps air, creating a barrier that slows heat transfer and shields occupants from the ferocious winds outside. A well-constructed snow cave could maintain temperatures several degrees above freezing, even when the blizzard outside raged at sub-zero levels. The mountain man's understanding of this principle was intuitive, honed through years of exposure, observation, and trial and error survival. Constructing a snow cave required careful planning. The first step was identifying a suitable snowdrift, dense, stable, and deep enough to provide insulation. A hasty dig in loose, unstable snow could collapse under weight or melt during use, leading to disaster. Mountain men would carefully carve a horizontal tunnel into the drift, large enough to accommodate their body and supplies but small enough to retain heat efficiently. The interior was shaped with smooth walls and ceilings to reduce the risk of collapse and to allow the trapped air to circulate evenly. Ventilation was a crucial consideration. A small hole at the top of the chamber ensured fresh air could enter without allowing freezing gusts to invade. This delicate balance between warmth and airflow demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of natural insulation and airflow dynamics. Inside the snow cave, every detail was designed for survival. Bedding made from pine boughs, leaves, or animal furs insulated the body from the cold ground. Fires were often small and controlled, placed carefully to provide warmth without melting the surrounding walls. The snow cave's entrance, often tunneled slightly downward, acted as a cold trap, allowing icy air to remain outside while the interior stayed relatively stable. Even the smallest actions, covering the entrance with snow, adjusting bedding layers, or regulating ember placement, could mean the difference between life and death during prolonged storms. Snow caves were not the only survival solution. For those with access to timber, log cabins provided a more permanent and robust form of shelter. Constructed from felled trees, log cabins offered superior insulation and protection from wind and snow. Unlike snow caves, which were temporary and required immediate environmental conditions, log cabins could be used season after season, providing a secure base for hunting, trapping, and travel. The design of log cabins reflected both practicality and resourcefulness. Logs were carefully notched and stacked to form walls, with gaps filled by moss, mud, or bark to seal out drafts. Roofs were angled to shed snow, and additional insulation layers, such as pine boughs, were often added for extreme weather conditions. Inside a log cabin, survival strategies extended beyond walls and roofs. Fires were built on stone hearths to prevent accidental burning of the wooden structure. Chimneys were designed to ventilate smoke while retaining heat efficiently. Bedding, food storage, and tools were arranged for easy access, reflecting a deep understanding of daily survival needs. Mountain men understood that efficiency, safety, and comfort, even in rudimentary forms, were essential for maintaining strength, morale, and the ability to endure prolonged periods of isolation. Beyond the physical construction of shelters, mountain men developed a range of survival techniques that complemented their shelters. Fire making, for example, was an essential skill. In freezing conditions, fire was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. Mountain men learned to start fires using flint and steel, carefully selecting dry wood and kindling, even in snowy or wet conditions. Fires were strategically placed to maximize warmth while minimizing risk, often on stone bases to prevent melting snow or igniting combustible shelter materials. The ability to maintain a controlled fire could mean the difference between hypothermia and survival. Food acquisition was another critical survival component. Winter months were harsh, and natural food sources were scarce. Mountain men relied on a combination of hunting, trapping, and foraging to sustain themselves. They used knowledge of animal behavior, seasonal patterns, and terrain to locate food sources efficiently. Traps and snares were often set near animal trails or water sources, while hunting required patience, skill, and knowledge of local fauna. Preservation techniques, such as smoking or drying meat, ensured that limited resources lasted longer, enabling survival during extended storms or when travel was impossible. Water, too, was a challenge in freezing conditions. Streams and rivers could be frozen over, and consuming snow directly could lower body temperature dangerously. Mountain men learned to melt snow efficiently, using fires or heated stones, and to locate natural springs that remained unfrozen. A knowledge of water sources, combined with careful rationing, ensured that hydration did not become a limiting factor in survival. Every decision regarding food and water was intertwined with shelter and heat management, forming a cohesive survival strategy. The psychological dimension of survival cannot be overstated. Harsh winter conditions, isolation, and the constant threat of exposure tested mental fortitude as much as physical endurance. Mountain men recognized the importance of maintaining morale and focus. A secure shelter, even a modest snow cave, provided not only physical protection, but also a sense of safety and control. This psychological comfort allowed men to conserve energy, make rational decisions, and maintain vigilance during prolonged storms. The interplay between mental resilience and practical survival skills was a hallmark of mountain men's success in extreme environments. Mountain men also adapted their clothing and personal gear to complement shelter strategies. Animal furs, layered clothing, and waterproofing techniques helped maintain body heat. Gloves, hats, and insulated boots protected extremities from frostbite. Tools were carried strategically: knives for cutting wood or food, flint and steel for fire starting, and rope or cordage for constructing shelters or setting traps. The integration of clothing, tools, and shelter formed a holistic survival system, demonstrating a deep understanding of the environment and how to manipulate it for maximum advantage. Historical accounts provide vivid examples of these survival strategies in action. Trappers often described enduring multi-day blizzards in snow caves, relying on precise construction techniques and careful management of fire and bedding. Log cabins built by mountain men in timbered regions became hubs of activity, providing safe spaces for rest, repair of gear, and food storage. Even temporary Lean-tos and brush huts saved lives during sudden storms, highlighting the adaptability and ingenuity of these frontiersmen. Each example underscores the importance of knowledge, observation, and practical skill in overcoming extreme environmental challenges. Mountain men were also innovative in combining shelter types and survival techniques. A snow cave might be built adjacent to a brush hut, providing a sleeping area protected from wind while leaving space for fire and work. Log cabins could be augmented with snow walls or insulation layers to withstand harsher storms. Such hybrid strategies reflected a continuous process of observation, experimentation, and adaptation, where lessons learned from one winter informed improvements for the next. Understanding the land remained crucial in all aspects of shelter and survival. Mountain men selected locations that offered natural protection, such as valleys shielded from prevailing winds, slopes with sun exposure, or areas near resources like water, timber, and game. Every construction project considered environmental hazards, such as avalanche risk, flooding, or falling branches. By integrating knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and material properties, mountain men created shelters that were not only effective, but resilient under extreme conditions. The legacy of these techniques is profound. Modern survivalists, outdoors enthusiasts, and educators study snow caves, log cabins, and other mountain men shelters as practical demonstrations of applied ingenuity. They illustrate core principles of insulation, fire management, resource utilization, and psychological resilience. Beyond historical interest, these shelters offer timeless lessons in human adaptability, showing how careful observation, skillful resource use, and strategic planning can transform a hostile environment into a livable space. Ultimately, the story of snow caves, log cabins, and survival techniques is a testament to the resourcefulness and resilience of mountain men. These men did more than endure harsh winters. They mastered the art of survival. Their shelters and methods reflect a profound understanding of natural laws, human needs, and the delicate balance between risk and preparation. In every snow cave dug, every log cabin constructed, and every fire carefully maintained, we see the essence of human ingenuity confronting one of nature's most formidable challenges. In reflecting on these practices, we gain insight into a comprehensive survival system The careful selection of shelter type based on conditions, strategic use of materials, efficient management of fire and heat, maintenance of physical and psychological well-being, and continuous observation of environmental cues. Mountain men did not merely react to conditions. They anticipated them, planned accordingly, and adapted with remarkable skill. Their methods are more than historical curiosities. They are enduring examples of how humans can survive and thrive in the most extreme environments. Inside the shelters of the mountain men, survival was not only about having walls and a roof. It was about creating a controlled environment where the body could retain heat, the mind could remain calm, and daily necessities could be met. Fires, bedding, and the arrangement of interior space were critical components of this environment. While snow caves, Lean-tos, brush huts, and log cabins provided protection from wind and snow, it was the thoughtful management of the interior that determined whether a man could endure days or even weeks of severe winter conditions. Fire was central to the survival strategy. A fire was not merely a source of heat. It was a lifeline, a psychological anchor, and a tool for food preparation, water melting, and signaling. Mountain men understood that the placement, size, and maintenance of a fire were critical. In snow caves, for instance, fires had to be small and controlled to prevent melting the walls or creating excess smoke. A poorly managed fire could cause the roof to collapse or fill the chamber with smoke, suffocating the occupants. To address this, mountain men often built stone or packed earth bases for their fires, which provided stability, reduced direct heat transfer to snow or wooden structures, and allowed embers to smolder safely for extended periods. In more traditional shelters like brush huts and log cabins, fire placement was equally strategic. Hearths were built on raised platforms or stone foundations, ensuring that heat radiated efficiently throughout the interior without causing structural damage. Chimneys and smoke vents were designed to optimize airflow, channeling smoke outside while retaining as much warmth as possible. Even in small Lean-tos, a minimal fire could be constructed in a shallow pit or on a few stones, providing necessary warmth without threatening the fragile structure. Mountain men learned that heat management required constant attention. Fire wood had to be carefully stacked and rationed, embers had to be maintained overnight, and sparks had to be monitored to prevent accidental fires. The choice and preparation of bedding were another critical survival factor. Sleeping directly on cold ground could quickly sap body heat, leading to hypothermia, even within a well-insulated shelter. To counter this, mountain men gathered natural materials such as pine boughs, leaves, moss, and animal hides to create layered sleeping platforms. These layers acted as insulation, lifting the body off the cold earth, trapping air for warmth, and reducing heat loss. The process of gathering and preparing bedding was meticulous. Boughs were often stacked thickly, leaves were carefully dried, and furs were oriented to maximize insulation properties. Even minor details, such as covering the top layer with dry moss or fur, could significantly improve comfort and warmth. The arrangement of the interior was a blend of practicality, efficiency, and safety. In snow caves, Lean-tos, and brush huts, space was often limited, so every element had a purpose. Sleeping areas were positioned to maximize warmth and minimize exposure to drafts. Fires were placed in locations that allowed even heat distribution while preventing accidental contact with bedding or structural materials. Tools, food, and personal gear were organized for quick access, minimizing the need to venture outside during harsh conditions. This level of interior planning reflects the mountain men's understanding that survival was not just about physical protection. It was about creating a functional, sustainable living space within a hostile environment. Water management within shelters was equally important. Consuming snow directly could lower body temperature dangerously, so mountain men often melted snow using fires or heated stones. In log cabins, small metal containers could be used to melt snow over the hearth, while in snow caves, heated rocks or embers were carefully placed in shallow depressions to produce drinking water. Proper hydration was essential for maintaining energy, regulating body temperature, and preventing fatigue during long, cold nights. This careful attention to water, combined with food preservation techniques such as drying and smoking meat, formed a comprehensive approach to sustenance within the shelter environment. Lighting was another consideration, though it is often overlooked. Even in the middle of the day, snow-covered landscapes could reduce visibility, and storm conditions often left shelters in darkness for extended periods. Mountain men used fires, small oil lamps, or reflective surfaces to illuminate interiors. This allowed for essential tasks such as preparing food, repairing clothing, tending traps, or performing maintenance on the shelter itself. Proper lighting also had psychological benefits, reducing the sense of isolation and helping maintain alertness during periods when storms kept men confined indoors. Temperature management was a constant concern. Mountain men understood that heat rises, and in confined spaces such as snow caves, it was necessary to create a stratification of warm air. Bedding was elevated, fire bases were optimized, and ventilation was carefully controlled to allow a consistent flow of fresh air without introducing cold drafts. They also learned to use natural insulation creatively, for instance, covering walls or ceilings with boughs, firs, or moss to reduce heat loss. Every aspect of temperature management was intentional, demonstrating a sophisticated, experiential understanding of thermal dynamics in extreme environments. The psychological dimension of interior space cannot be overstated. In the midst of blizzards, isolation, and freezing temperatures, the shelter provided a sense of control and security. Mountain men understood that mental resilience was as important as physical preparedness. A well-arranged interior with a safe fire, comfortable bedding, and organized tools reduced stress, conserved energy, and improved decision-making. The shelter became not just a physical refuge, but a mental one, reinforcing confidence and enabling men to endure conditions that would otherwise seem unbearable. Even minor design choices had survival implications. For example, entrances were often oriented to block prevailing winds, and snow or boughs might be used to cover gaps. In snow caves, entrances were tunneled downward to create a cold trap, while in log cabins, doors and windows were sealed to retain heat. Bedding and seating areas were placed strategically, not just for warmth, but to avoid congestion, reduce the risk of accidental fires, and optimize comfort. Every decision reflected an integrated approach to survival, where the interplay of fire, bedding, and interior organization formed a cohesive, functional system. Mountain men also developed routines to maintain the interior environment. Fires were stoked periodically to maintain warmth, snow was cleared from entrances to prevent accumulation, and bedding was rearranged to keep it dry and insulated. Food preparation, tool maintenance, and water melting were performed in sequence to minimize exposure to cold and maximize efficiency. These routines were learned through experience, trial and error, and observation of successful strategies used by others in the wilderness. Over time, they became second nature, ensuring that the interior environment remained habitable even during extended periods of severe weather. Tools and materials stored within the shelter were also managed with care. Knives, axes, flint, cordage, and spare clothing were organized for quick access, reducing the need to venture outside during dangerous conditions. Food stores were protected from moisture and pests, and spare bedding materials were kept dry and ready for use. This level of organization was not arbitrary, it was essential for survival. Mountain men knew that even small inefficiencies or misplacements could have life-threatening consequences during blizzards when mobility and visibility were severely limited. Sleep itself was a carefully managed aspect of survival. Mountain men often slept in shifts or took strategic naps to maintain alertness, conserve energy, and avoid frostbite or hypothermia. The combination of insulated bedding, heat from fires, and the protective structure of the shelter allowed for restorative sleep despite harsh external conditions. Sleep hygiene, though not recognized in modern terms, was implicitly understood. Maintaining warmth, limiting drafts, and arranging bedding efficiently were all part of ensuring that rest was both safe and effective. The integration of these elements, fire, bedding, interior layout, routines, tools, and psychological factors, formed a holistic approach to survival that was both sophisticated and adaptable. Mountain men did not rely on luck. They relied on careful planning, keen observation, and practical knowledge passed down through experience. Their interiors were microcosms of survival strategy, reflecting a deep understanding of how to manipulate and optimize the environment to sustain life in extreme conditions. Historical accounts provide vivid illustrations of these practices. Diaries and letters from trappers describe huddling in snow caves for days during storms, carefully managing embers and bedding to maintain warmth. Log cabins in timbered regions served as bases where men repaired gear, dried clothes, and prepared for extended expeditions. Even the simplest Lean-tos were described as critical shelters, providing protection and a place to rest when sudden storms struck. In each case, the interior strategies, fire placement, bedding arrangements, tool organization, were central to survival, highlighting the mountain men's ingenuity and adaptability. The legacy of these interior strategies extends beyond historical interest. Modern survivalists, educators, and outdoor enthusiasts study fire management, bedding, and interior arrangement as essential components of wilderness survival. These techniques demonstrate practical principles of heat retention, efficient use of resources, and psychological resilience. They show how thoughtful planning and meticulous attention to detail can transform even a rudimentary shelter into a livable environment under extreme conditions. Ultimately, the story of fires, bedding, and shelter interiors is a story of human ingenuity and adaptability. Mountain men mastered the art of creating habitable microenvironments in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Their strategies were not arbitrary. They were based on observation, experimentation, and a deep understanding of environmental principles. By integrating fire, bedding, and interior organization into a cohesive survival system, they were able to endure blizzards, sub-zero temperatures, and prolonged isolation. Their experience provides timeless lessons in resourcefulness, preparation, and resilience. As we reflect on these practices, it becomes clear that survival in the mountains was an art as much as a science. The careful selection of fire placement, the layering of bedding, the arrangement of tools and supplies, and the psychological reinforcement provided by a safe interior all worked together to create an environment where humans could endure extreme conditions. Mountain men did not merely survive. They mastered their surroundings through skill, observation, and ingenuity. The interiors of their shelters were not just spaces to rest. They were lifelines, classrooms, and sanctuaries, demonstrating the profound interplay between environment, design, and human resilience. The story of mountain men is not merely a tale of survival. It is a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the capacity to adapt to the most extreme conditions. For centuries, these rugged individuals ventured into the wild, facing snow-covered mountains, unpredictable storms, and freezing temperatures that could claim lives in a matter of hours. While their Lean-tos, snow caves, brush huts, and log cabins provided essential protection, it was the wisdom, discipline, and mindset of the mountain men that ensured their survival. Examining their legacy allows us to understand not only how they endured, but also what lessons their experiences hold for modern humans navigating both literal and metaphorical wildernesses. At the heart of the mountain men's success was a deep understanding of the natural world. They were keen observers, reading subtle signs in the environment that warned of impending storms, guided them to water and food, and informed their construction of shelters. The behavior of animals, the patterns of wind, the texture and density of snow, all were clues that demanded attention and interpretation. Unlike casual travelers, mountain men treated the wilderness as a teacher rather than an obstacle. Their survival depended on learning from it, respecting it, and adapting their behavior accordingly. This profound connection to the land illustrates a principle that remains relevant today. Observation, patience, and respect for natural systems are foundational to human resilience. One of the enduring lessons from mountain men is the value of preparation and resourcefulness. They ventured into the mountains with minimal supplies, yet their knowledge of shelter construction, fire management, food acquisition, and water sourcing allowed them to endure conditions that would overwhelm the unprepared. Every item they carried, every branch they selected for a lean-to, every stone placed around a fire was intentional. This meticulous attention to detail highlights the importance of foresight, planning, and maximizing limited resources, skills that are valuable not only in wilderness survival, but in modern life. The principle is simple. Careful preparation can mitigate risks, conserve energy, and increase the likelihood of success in challenging circumstances. Adaptability was another cornerstone of the mountain men's legacy. The wilderness is unpredictable, and conditions could change rapidly. A sunny morning could give way to a blizzard within hours, forcing mountain men to alter their routes, find or build shelter quickly, and adjust food and water usage. They learned to improvise, using available materials and innovative ways to meet immediate needs. A snowdrift became a snow cave, a fallen tree became a lean-to. Rocks were arranged to stabilize structures or contain fires. This capacity to pivot, problem solve, and innovate under pressure illustrates a broader principle. Flexibility and creativity are essential for survival, whether in the wild or in the complex challenges of contemporary life. The mountain men's lifestyle also emphasizes the importance of observation and learning from experience. Mistakes were often costly, yet they provided critical knowledge for future decisions. If a shelter collapsed under heavy snow, the lesson was remembered and shared. If a fire failed to provide adequate warmth, techniques were refined. This iterative process of trial, error, and improvement demonstrates a mindset of continuous learning, a mindset that remains vital in all aspects of human endeavor. By paying attention, reflecting on outcomes, and adjusting behavior, mountain men cultivated a form of experiential intelligence that allowed them to navigate one of the harshest environments on Earth. Another key aspect of their legacy is the integration of mental and physical preparedness. Survival was not solely a matter of physical endurance. It required psychological resilience. Mountain men faced isolation, fear, and extreme conditions that could easily overwhelm the mind. Yet the security provided by a well-constructed shelter, The warmth of a fire and the knowledge that they were equipped to meet challenges allowed them to maintain mental clarity. The ability to remain calm, make rational decisions under pressure, and maintain hope is a crucial lesson from their experiences. It reminds us that resilience is a holistic concept, encompassing both body and mind, and that preparedness involves nurturing both physical and psychological capacities. The techniques of mountain men also highlight the importance of efficiency and prioritization. They could not afford to carry unnecessary items, waste time, or expend energy on ineffective methods. Every action, from cutting branches for a shelter to melting snow for drinking water, was calculated for maximum benefit with minimal cost. This principle of efficiency, doing the most with the least, remains relevant today, whether in wilderness survival, project management, or personal decision making. It teaches the value of focusing on essential needs, conserving energy, and making deliberate, strategic choices in pursuit of long-term objectives. Mountain men also exemplify the principle of learning from others and sharing knowledge. While often traveling alone or in small groups, they relied on the collective wisdom of experienced trappers and explorers. Techniques for building Lean-tos, constructing snow caves, managing fires, and tracking animals were passed down orally or demonstrated in the field. Mistakes were discussed and corrected, successes were emulated, and innovations were adopted broadly. This culture of knowledge sharing emphasizes the importance of mentorship, observation, and collaboration, lessons that transcend time and context. Survival was a community effort, even in solitude, highlighting that learning and resilience often rely on networks of shared experience. Another enduring lesson from mountain men is the value of patience and careful timing. Nature operates on its own schedule, and impulsive actions can be deadly. Mountain men understood the rhythms of the wilderness, when to travel, when to rest, when to hunt, and when to fortify shelters. They observed animal migrations, weather patterns, and snow conditions to make informed decisions. This patience and awareness of timing allowed them to conserve energy, avoid unnecessary risks, and capitalize on opportunities. It is a lesson that extends beyond survival. Understanding timing, observing natural or systemic patterns, and exercising patience can enhance success in complex, dynamic environments. The mountain men's ability to innovate with limited resources also provides profound insights. They transformed natural materials, branches, rocks, leaves, moss, and animal hides, into effective tools for shelter, warmth, and sustenance. They understood the properties of each material, experimented with configurations, and adapted designs based on the challenges they faced. This ingenuity demonstrates the power of resourcefulness. When conventional options are unavailable, creativity, experimentation, and deep understanding of available resources can bridge the gap. It is a reminder that adaptability and ingenuity often outweigh sheer strength or abundance of resources. Psychologically, mountain men developed resilience through routines and structure within their shelters. Fires were tended methodically, bedding was prepared meticulously, tools were organized carefully, and daily survival tasks were carried out with discipline. This structure provided a sense of control in an environment that could easily induce panic and despair. By maintaining predictable routines, mountain men conserved mental energy, reduced stress, and reinforced confidence in their ability to survive. This principle of structured resilience applies universally, creating routines, organizing resources, and maintaining discipline can sustain performance under pressure, whether in wilderness, survival, or modern life. Mountain men also demonstrated the importance of respect for the environment. They did not conquer nature, they cooperated with it. They understood wind patterns, snow behavior, animal habits, and seasonal changes, integrating these observations into their survival strategies. Their shelters were designed to work with the elements, not against them. Fires, bedding, and shelter interiors were configured to harness natural properties for warmth and protection. This respect and understanding highlight a broader lesson. Humans thrive when they align their actions with the natural systems around them rather than attempting to dominate or ignore them. Observing, understanding, and adapting to environmental realities are fundamental skills for long-term survival and sustainability. The legacy of mountain men extends to modern survival techniques, outdoor education, and wilderness exploration. Snow caves, Lean-tos, brush huts, and log cabins remain studied and practiced by survivalists and adventurers around the world. Their methods illustrate principles of insulation, fire management, space optimization, psychological fortitude, and resource efficiency. Beyond practical skills, mountain men provide an enduring example of the mindset required to thrive in adversity: careful observation, continuous learning, mental resilience, and inventive problem solving. Even in contemporary life, metaphorical lessons from mountain men are valuable. Facing challenges, uncertainty, or periods of scarcity requires adaptability, patience, preparation, and mental fortitude, the same qualities that ensured survival in blizzards and snowdrifts. Their legacy teaches that adversity is best met with a combination of skill, resourcefulness, and calm, deliberate action. Whether navigating personal, professional, or environmental challenges, the principles derived from mountain men's experiences remain remarkably relevant. The story of mountain men is also one of humility. Despite their ingenuity and toughness, they were at the mercy of natural forces. A sudden blizzard, a frozen river, or a collapsing snowdrift could render even the most experienced trapper vulnerable. Their survival was contingent on constant vigilance, respect for the environment, and the integration of knowledge and skill. This humility, combined with adaptability and ingenuity, underscores a timeless principle. Success often arises from collaboration with natural systems, disciplined preparation, and ongoing learning, rather than arrogance or overconfidence. Moreover, mountain men embody the human capacity for innovation under constraint. When resources were limited and conditions extreme, they found solutions. Snow became insulation, boughs became bedding, rocks stabilized fires, and hides provided warmth. Their creativity demonstrates that limitation can fuel ingenuity, prompting solutions that are elegant, effective, and sustainable. This principle resonates in diverse fields today, from engineering and architecture to leadership and problem solving. Constraints can inspire innovative solutions when approached with knowledge, observation, and adaptability. The mountain men's holistic approach to survival, combining knowledge of the land, skillful use of materials, interior management, fire, food, water, and mental resilience, offers a blueprint for navigating complexity. Each element reinforced the others. Shelters protected from wind and snow, fire provided warmth and cooking capability, bedding insulated the body, routines maintained efficiency, and observation informed decision-making. Together, these strategies created a resilient system capable of sustaining life in conditions that would overwhelm most humans. Their legacy is also a celebration of human courage and perseverance. Facing isolation, extreme cold, and constant danger, mountain men did not retreat or despair. They confronted adversity with preparation, ingenuity, and adaptability. Their survival